So I'm going to be telling you folks about this project that I'm leading called Atlas of Caregiving. And it's something that we're doing through the Family Caregiver Alliance, and it's funded by the Robert Johnson Foundation. And as the sort of a little catchphrase over there, we're exploring new ways to really understand and map what family caregiving is all about. And this project came about because about a year and a half ago, we had an expert roundtable. We gathered some of the top people in the country on the issue of family caregiving and talked about what are caregivers' needs and how could technologies help them. And one of the key things that came out of the conversation was simply an acknowledgement about how much we don't understand. We have a lot of statistics that were presented earlier today by Kathy about how widespread the needs are and so forth. So at a big level, we clearly understand caregivers' needs. But what we don't have is an idea of what is the day-to-day experience like? How does it differ from someone caring for autism versus someone caring for Alzheimer's, for caregivers of Parkinson's, or families where there's many people involved? How do these things look similar? How do they look different? We have essentially zero data on that. And which is shocking because if you look at that sort of metaphor of the iceberg, about 10% above the waterline, think of that as the professional healthcare world, nurses, doctors, etc. And the stuff below the water is family caregiving, where almost all the work actually happens. And we spend about $3 trillion a year in the US on stuff above the surface, and pretty much the 90% of the work being done by family caregivers has effectively been ignored. And so we felt that more needs to be done about that. And so this project is an experiment of itself to see how could we study family caregiving. And the idea of an atlas is very much aspirational. We hope that someday there will be a really rich compendium of information about caregiving, how it varies across the country, how it varies across demographics, diseases, etc. We're not anywhere near that yet. The atlas is an experiment to see what could we learn if we tried to look at families in new ways. And we're combining a number of different methodologies. We have sort of traditional ethnography, so we interview people, we ask them to keep logs and so forth, but we're even doing that in ways that are novel. We're also using some sensor technologies, wearable sensors, environmental sensors in these people's homes, and we're going to try to visualize what we learn in new ways. And I'll very rapidly present sort of preliminary work from this. This is preliminary. Yesterday was literally the very last day of field research, so now we finally get to sort of take a breath and analyze what we found, but that's where we're going. The other key question in terms of these methodologies is, do these methods work at all? So we don't know. These haven't been tried, so we're trying to learn what can we learn about caregiving, but also what can we learn about the tools to study caregiving. We framed the issue, the research around three major questions. One is who is involved. We so often talk about the caregiver, the care recipient. Often life is much, much messier than that. What exactly do they do? Someone earlier today, the second speaker, Kelly, said that she doesn't do the caregiving. She hires people for that, but that's not quite right. We know that a lot of that organization, all of that thinking about it is very much part of caregiving. So we want to know, what exactly do they do? What is the burden of care like on a day-to-day level? And finally, what is the impact in terms of time, emotional energy, physical energy? Can we get a sense of what the burden is like? Currently, we're sort of halfway through the project. As I said, literally just finished the field research. We spent a couple of months looking into different technologies that we could use, putting together an innovative sort of care research program, tried it out, and then for the last 3 months, August, September, and into October, we've been actually working with families. And so we've got a bunch of work now to actually make sense of what we did and try to write up good reports and all that. And we've had 14 families participate kind of in the in-home research, which I'll describe and show you examples of in a moment. Our desire had been to get as much diversity as we could within this rather small sample set. And we were actually relatively successful. We have caregivers ranging in age from 30 to 73, care recipients ranging in age from 8 to 101. We've had a really wide range of conditions, so autism and cerebral palsy and type 1 diabetes and Parkinson's and dementia and MS and cancer and many more things. And also quite a wide variety of family content. So we've had people that are, say, economically relatively well off. On the other hand, people who are extremely struggling financially. We've had people sort of in the urban centers of San Francisco, Silicon Valley, all that. But we've also been, out to the Central Valley, down into the Salinas Valley, and so forth. So within a couple hours of San Francisco, but within that, we've had a good variety of people. And each family essentially participated primarily over 3 days. And I want to tell you this so that the rest of the data that I show you will make sense. Ahead of time, we had a couple of questionnaires that they filled out online, very light, just to give us some context. Then we would show up, let's say Monday morning, and we would spend about an hour and a half with the family caregivers, and sometimes the patients as well, to really just have a conversation. What was your life like? How did you get to this point? What is day-to-day caregiving like? How does it vary? What are bad days? What are good days? Who's involved, and so forth. And then we introduced them to the tools we wanted them to use over the next sort of 24 to 30 hours, which included a log that we wanted them to fill out, as well as these sensors, which I'll show you. Then the next day, so Tuesday afternoon, we would swing by for about 5 minutes to really pick up those things, ask how things went. And the team would do some very rough, quick analysis of that data that night to sort of immerse ourselves as well as we could in a short period of time in what happened. And then the third day, we would go back and have another hour-long conversation with them to talk through that particular day. Here's what you wrote in your log. What was hard? What was easy? What was pleasurable? And also use that to compare against what the sensors measured and show them that and get their own thoughts on what did the sensors see. So let me show you what this all looked like. So the log, very quickly, I know you can't read that scribbled, but never mind. We asked people to keep as detailed a log as they could. What time did something happen, for how long, what was going on, who were you doing it for, the level for caregiving activities, how much assistance did the care recipient give you? Were you simply giving them, hello, it's time to do this, or were you actually doing it for them? And how cooperative or not were they? And also, how stressed were you feeling in the moment that was going on? And in this I'll just very quickly tell you what's going on in the story here, because I'm going to refer to it a couple times. At 2:15, she drove with Mom to Trader Joe's. They spent an hour in the store, sort of shopping through it. They came home. She unpacked the car. Mom's complaining about having some back pain, and she gave her some medicine. She made some phone calls. Then the last line is that there was a huge, basically, very loud noise outside their apartment complex. Apparently someone had started doing construction downstairs, which caught her by surprise. It made her stress really go up. In this case, the caregiver is a young woman, or young adult, and it's her mother who has Alzheimer's. So one of the key things that we do after the fact is, how do we diagram all these things that people put in their logs? How do we describe what the day looks like? And this is one very preliminary attempt at that. And in this case, the person on the left, the circle on the left, it's a husband and a wife, and both of them are jointly taking care of her brother. And he also has his own health issues, but her brother, the three of them live together, has a lot of health issues as well. And if you look at his diagram, the little red bars are things when he was caring for the brother. So those are caregiving activities. The orange bars are self-care activities. As you can see, he has to do a lot to take care of himself. And then the green and blue and the yellow are either sort of work, pleasure, or sort of other. And as you can see from his life, the man never has a period where he's not doing something to care for himself or his brother. Even throughout the night, he has to get up many times to do that. The wife over here, she also, both of them, believe it or not, work through all of this. And so she, as you can see, has a lot of caregiving activities that day, and a couple of moments of watching TV and so forth. She actually does manage to sleep through the night, which is a miracle. So we've been attempting these sort of diagrams. How could we depict how crazy and chaotic and fragmented the day is? These aren't perfect by any means. Even at the end of the project, they won't be perfect. They're a start. But even this has had some impact in getting people to appreciate the fragmented nature of the day. one of the technologies we've used is a product called a narrative clip. It's a tiny little thing. You can clip it, as you can see from the pictures, to your shirt or whatever. Basically, it takes a photo roughly every 30 seconds, every minute or so. And as you can imagine, most of the pictures are really not anything you can put on the wall. They're blurry, they're ceilings, they're walls, they're kitchen cabinets, and so forth. But the thinking was that on that third day when we go back and have a conversation with the family on what was going on, that the pictures may be really useful from a short-term memory perspective. It might help bring that moment back to life. So we thought that would be worth a try. And I'll show you how, on the whole, it actually worked quite well in two ways. This is in the background is that same log, and you can see at the top it says 2:15, which is when they supposedly got to Trader Joe's, actually, the 2:20. And we can see from the stream of photos, it's hard to read the numbers at the bottom, but it says 14:26:05, so that's 2:26 in the afternoon. So she actually got to Trader Joe's, at 2:26, not at 2:20. Which is a minor differential, but in other cases there were actually much larger gaps between what the person had recorded in their log and what the photo showed, and it allowed us to correct the log. The other place it helped was, again, to sort of bring back the memories of what was that experience like. In this case, they had spent an hour in the grocery store, so one of my questions during the interview was that frustrating to you? I mean, spending an hour in a grocery store seems like forever, because mom walked slowly and so forth. And it brought up this picture of, I think it's cereal boxes that the camera had captured. And she spoke about that. She said, well, it's not the time it takes. And then she started talking about how essentially what's really, really, really hard, and it never goes away, is this appreciation that she is the decision maker in the family. So her mom can no longer decide which cereal to buy, which can of soup to buy. So just all those tiny little, which seems like, how hard is that? But it's a never-ending decision making. She also talked about how she had always tried to find ways to keep mom occupied. So she had sent mom off to go buy 5 bananas. I guess there were only one kind of bananas in Trader Joe's, so mom could do that. So constantly having to think of activities that her mom could do where she could get even like 2 minutes of a break. Because mom's off there buying bananas and she can sort of like relax and buy the things. And it really brings home how sort of grueling caregiving can be. It's all these little things, that the doctor's not going to ask you about. It's not wound care, but it's never ending. So the pictures were very helpful in sort of bringing back the emotions of the time. One of the other devices we used was this thing, and I've had it before. If any of you know Fitbit and things like that, think of this as sort of a scientific grade version of that with absolutely no useful user interface. So it's not a consumer product, but it gives you a higher quality of data in terms of heart rate and what's known as EDA, electrodermal activity. Think of that as how sweaty your skin is, which if you measure that, you can both tell how sweaty the person is, but dramatic changes sort of over a couple of seconds can reflect sort of changes in emotions. So emotional arousal, good or bad, show up that way. So we use this thing to collect a lot of data, so the caregivers would wear this during the 24 to 30 hours. And this is the raw data, so I'm not expecting anybody to make any sense of this. But just very quickly, the top is kind of that skin sweatiness. The red line and the orange line together have to do with heart rate. The red, green, and blue in the middle are these accelerometers. They're checking movement, which then gets kind of overall into that purple line, which is telling you about how much were they moving. So one of the things that jumps out over here is, of course, when they were sleeping. Right in the middle there's not much going on. That's because they're sleeping. So this is the raw data, which we then looked at more deeply and compared against what people had put down in their log about what was stressful and when they were not. So as an example, in that log, at 3:58, she had talked about her stress was really high because of a really loud bang and so forth. And in the chart, the orange line is her heart rate, which doesn't seem to vary dramatically during that period. It's just what it is. But the blue, which is the skin sweatiness, if you will, certainly reached a peak at that same time. So if we were simply looking at the blue data, we wouldn't know that this was an emotional event, but it does correlate with her own findings. One of the other things we did, which I'm definitely not expecting you to read, but never mind, there's a sort of an analysis you can do on the skin sweatiness data to try to identify moments of arousal, potential arousal. And on this same thing, you won't be able to see it, but at 6:45 a.m., there's a huge spike. And so we went back and asked her, by the way, did you wake up in a surprise? And she said she had. The alarm had gone off, she'd practically fallen out of bed because it was such a surprise. And so there were times when we could see from the data a moment that was worth having a conversation about to better understand what the day was like. We also used a couple of environmental sensors. The little tubular thing, they're all very small, but the little tube thing is like an indoor environmental sensor. You get temperature, humidity, CO2 level, and also noise level. And then the little square white things are movement sensors. And I'll show you what we were able to do with that. And our purpose behind doing this was really, it sounds silly, but it's well, we can. Let's see what we will learn. Are they useful?
Is that chapstick?
That's a chapstick for size comparison.
Sorry, now we have sensors.
Yeah. Who knows what's in those things? Yeah. So anyway, we went into these people's homes and, assuming that they felt okay with this, we had this little basket of equipment which we plugged in, and then we littered their house with these sensors. So this is a thing from the environmental sensors. Top is sound level, the middle one is CO2 level, and the bottom is temperature. And I grabbed a piece from the same log that you've been seeing. And so you can see, in fact, that the sound level peaks at 4 o'clock when she said it was a loud bang. But looking at it more generally, you can see when they were out of the home. When they were at Trader Joe's, there's a time when the sound level is much quieter. The TV's not on and so forth. So it really it kind of validates, it corroborates when they said they were out shopping. Similarly, whenever the window gets opened at home and fresh air comes in, you see that the CO2 level goes down a lot. And so there were things like this, which we found kind of interesting. In the end, they weren't dramatically interesting, but they were interesting. And then the other thing we did was we tried to put these motion sensors in the house. Now this turned out to be more of a challenge than we would think, because when we put them in the house, then someone has to go and draw a plan of the house, which was me or one of my other colleagues. And so, you had rapidly running through the person's home, trying to make an architectural map of it. So we did what we could. And then when we look at the data, you kind of get a sense of where is activity happening. And one of the more interesting things, again, picking on the same log, the same family, was how much time the young woman spent in her own bedroom. And it seemed that within the home, that was kind of the safe place for her. So anytime she needed to go, just to get a breath, she'd be in and out of there a lot. So, these two environmental sensors, they're not so earth-shattering, but they were interesting, and so they hold a lot of promise as well. We're also looking to see how could we take all this information and put it into one diagram. Even if we don't know well enough what the numbers mean, maybe if we put it in one place, we might see patterns that are otherwise hidden. And so we're experimenting with how can this data be shown. Finally, one of the things that we did that's shockingly innovative in interviews was really trying to explore what is the care ecosystem, in the sense of who's in the picture, who's caring for who. And so we asked basically 4 simple questions. Who is in the household? 2, who are you caring for? Your primary person, but also are there pets? Are there neighbors? Are there friends who are ill that you're also involved in the care of? Thirdly, who else cares for those people? So we get a sense of, who's all the people that somehow need to stay coordinated. And then finally, and a very important question, we would ask, who cares for you? And if you don't have health issues, fine. And there's people that presumably are supporting you in being a caregiver. People that are supporting you emotionally, spiritually. What does that look like? And so using this information, we're trying to draw these kind of care networks. And in this particular case, it's one of the more simple ones. There's a husband who's caring for his wife with dementia. They have a son who lives at home. They also have a home aide who's in the home quite a lot. There's a daycare facility that she goes to occasionally nearby. She has a couple of sisters who are far away, but sometimes they fly in, but they at least provide on the phone some support and so forth. And just as importantly, he talked about how there were a couple of neighbors that had really stepped up to take care of him. They would make sure he had dinner. They would make sure that he had a break and so forth. So this was his care ecosystem. Again, we're experimenting with how to draw these things. What's the best way to present such information? Here's a very different attempt at it. In this particular case, you can't see it in the colors over here, but there's a mother being taken care of by her daughter at the top. But there's also two other sons. And like one of our challenges was, how do you define household? It seems simple. It's like the people who live in the house. But in this particular case, mom's house is over here, daughter's house is across the driveway, brother's house is just in the back, and the other brother is 2 doors away. So in a very real sense, the household is kind of like this compound. And so how do we think about that? Another thing that we can't figure out how to put in the diagram is that dog. This dog seems to be like an incredibly brilliant dog. As we explained to us, the dog will go into the bed of the person who really seems to need the most cuddling at the time. So sometimes he's in the bed of mom at the house next door. Sometimes he's in, her bed. She spends the night these days in her mom's house because mom needs help at night. And sometimes he's at home with the husband because he's kind of stressed out too. So how do we present this stuff? I don't know. We're working on it. But if you're going to serve families, you have to appreciate these dynamics. That dog is a critical member of this care team.
Did he have a sensor on?
He didn't. We should have. So just to wrap up. So as I said, these 14 families, we literally did the last one yesterday. So this is very preliminary. If you ask me 2 months after we've had a chance to work on this, it might say very different things. So don't hold me to this. But at this point, the interviews are invaluable. What you can learn when you speak to people, if you go to their homes, you look around, you observe the dynamics and so forth, you ask them questions that they never thought of asking themselves, it's invaluable. So one of the challenges of scaling this to hundreds of thousands of families is that, of course, you can't do that part. The log, it's also very interesting. It is difficult. Imagine in your crazy caregiving day, to take a few minutes every now and then to constantly write stuff down is hard. So understandably, it's often incomplete, it's often inaccurate, and yet the log has proven to be incredibly valuable. Many of the people had said to us afterwards that they were shocked to see what they had written down. That they didn't realize how many hours they were spending on this, or what got them stressed out and what didn't, and so forth. One woman said, I never realized I skip lunch so often, because you're just on this treadmill. The narrative, which is the little camera, turned out to be surprisingly useful. Granted, over the course of a day, it might take a few hundred pictures, and only 2 of them might be useful, but those 2 were really good. The other way that ended up being interesting was in some families we had multiple people wear the camera. So like in the case of the husband and wife caring for the brother, all of them chose to participate. And they found it really interesting to see the world from the other person's perspective. So the wife in this case, or the sister, however you want to think about it, there's one photo that got taken with the brother, the ill brother, wearing the thing, and he's seeing across the table her filling out the pill boxes. And she's, so concentrated on it, looking kind of grim. And she says, oh, that's what I look like from your point of view. And so it was quite eye-opening. The Empatica device, that's the wrist device, the Fitbit thing. This whole area is clearly really, really promising. At the same time, it's really, really burdened. We're getting all this data, it's hard to make sense of it. There's also a lot of other types of devices that are coming up, many of which we looked at. They're all so early that sometimes they're simply not ready. There was like a patch, which is sort of like a Band-Aid that you could put on that would give you really good ECG readings and pulse right from here. It'd be much better data than on your wrist, but it wasn't ready. There's another device you can wear that you sort of clip to your belt, which is really measuring your breathing. How deep is your breathing? How rapid is it? How regular is it? And you can learn a lot conceptually about your stress level from breathing. But again, that wasn't quite ready. So this is incredibly exciting for nerdy people like me. It's not necessarily ready for prime time, but it's very promising. In terms of the environmental sensors, we feel like to to do that well requires a lot more effort than we were able to do. And the visualizations, I think, even our work in progress, don't look at this too closely types of diagrams, people are just stunned by. So they're very powerful, showing the complexity of our care networks, showing the complexity of our fragmented caregiver days, has been really eye-opening to people. So anyway, I'll stop there.